Hello. It's me again. Okay, we're going to read one chapter of the Leslie Clare book. I really wanted to read another one of Jackie O, but those chapters are long and I have to get myself in gear. So I think this one will take maybe 30 minutes, maybe a little less. All right, so chapter 3 is entitled Business Affairs. The tall, dark-haired young man in the lemon yellow leather jacket and tracksuit glanced at me and gave me a half smile as we passed in the street. I was on my way to buy a long mirror I had spotted in the Chelsea branch of Habitat, one that would be just right for my hallway. As I stepped into the shop, I couldn't help glancing back at him, and our eyes locked. He had stopped still on the pavement and was staring after me. I escaped into the shop, only to find that as I wandered around the store, Mr. Leather Jacket was trailing casually in my wake. Every time I looked directly at him, he appeared to be deeply interested in some item of furniture. But he made no attempt to hide, and that yellow jacket stood out like a beacon. Finally, I heard someone clear his throat just behind me. Would you like to have coffee with me and cakes? My mother had taught me not to speak to strange men, and definitely not accept offers of coffee and cakes. This time he met my gaze with a quirky, if slightly nervous grin. I'd like that, I heard myself saying. Thank you. His name was Jim Player, and he was 5 years older than me. He did most of the talking during the next 2 hours, and by the end of it, I knew he was a record producer who sang and wrote songs too, and that he also owned an employment agency, and that I was in love with him. I was 21, and I was romantic and impetuous, but it seemed to me that something special had happened in my life, and I mustn't let it go. After 2 hours and enough coffee to keep us awake for a week, he invited me to walk with him to his car and listen to a soul record he had just made. We sat together in the car, and when I told him that his voice was somewhere between Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder, his reply was a rather stern, "It's my own voice, not someone's sound-alike." But it was. We were married a year later. By then, in an amazingly short space of time, I had become a partner in my future husband's employment agency and found myself rubbing shoulders with some of the most powerful businessmen in the city of London. The firm was a chauffeur and a messenger agency and had established itself in an unusual line, supplying chauffeurs to banks and business houses. Jim had cornered a lucrative market and, although it was early days when we met, the business was expanding by the week. A staff of 9 worked out of 3 rooms in ground-floor offices off Finsbury Circus. Jim was living in a small penthouse apartment in the Barbican? I don't know. And had a small music studio in West London where he went every day. "I'll teach you everything I know about the chauffeur business, and then I'll leave it to you to run the show," he declared, showing implicit faith in me from the outset, adding somewhat less romantically, "You start by making the tea." And I spent the next week doing just that, as well as getting to know what the agency was all about. I caught on very quickly. I'd like to think I'm bright. I like to think I'm a bright spark, and organizing has always been one of my strongest points. Inside 3 months, I was taking care of the day-to-day workings of the business, attending meetings in the city, drumming up accounts by going to the right receptions and making new contacts. It was fascinating, a challenge, and I loved every heady minute of it. Hold on, I gotta peek and see how long. These are not long chapters. We had 2 books in the office, one for our regulars, experienced chauffeurs we would call on any time, the other for temporary drivers, men who perhaps had been made redundant at their last job and only wanted work until they could get something full-time elsewhere. Would-be chauffeurs would be given an intensive vetting. We asked them to complete a questionnaire and demanded 2 references, plus a clean license and 5 years professional experience behind the wheel. Jim had decided to specialize rather than spread the workload too thinly. The chairman's secretary would call up because their own chauffeur was on holiday or off sick. The bank would provide the car, and we would provide the driver. "If you are being hired to drive someone's 40,000-pound Bentley, you can't be too careful," Jim cautioned me as he showed me the questionnaires. "Remember that when you're interviewing them." All our chauffeurs wore smart gray suits and peaked caps, and our reputation for excellence soon spread over the square mile. Not Joey. Joey's being a little angel asleep on the sofa, and Timothy is in the garbage can. At our peak, we had numerous banks on our books, mainly in the city and the West End, and we would call on 5,000 full-time chauffeurs with a backup of 150 temps. It sounds extraordinary, but some banks had a whole fleet of limousines, and the chauffeurs to go with them, and a pecking order with the head chauffeur in charge. One corporation I recruited onto our books had no fewer than 50 drivers. We also attracted celebrity status. Our clients ranged from Barbara Cartland. Barbara Cartland is everywhere. and actresses like Jenny Seagrove to the chairman of McDonald's. In my second year running the show, the thoughtful Barbara Cartland kindly sent over a huge box of vitamins for Jim, while my in-tray was constantly filled with vouchers for hamburgers. Ah, that would be wonderful. At our height, the business was turning over £2 million a year. Jim bought Gablecott, an elegant 5-bedroom mock Tudor mansion in Ham, a horse ride from Richmond Park, complete with stone fireplace, an indoor swimming pool, sauna, and a lovely garden. The house cost £450,000, and he spent a further £200,000 turning it into a veritable palace. At the top of the property boom in 1989, it was valued at £1.2 million. We were married on 4 September 1982 in St. Michael's Church, Highgate Village, the steeple of which is the highest point in London. I wore a dress of ivory silk taffeta which I designed myself, with puff sleeves and long train and pearls sewn into every trimming. It was a picture book wedding, and the only sadness for me was the absence of my father. He had last been heard of in Cornwall with yet another wife, and I had lost touch with him. Jim took me to America for our honeymoon, a week in Miami, then on to California to plow through the obligatory tourist sites of Disneyland and Universal City, and a final magic week in New York. What a wonderful lifestyle we had. The agency was rich and running, and so were we. To sharpen my business acumen, I enrolled for various courses such as Dale Carnegie, Training Leaders, the Landmark Education, a breakthrough in what is possible for people, and Werner Erhard's Self-Awareness, EST, Earnhardt's seminars training. Whether the New Age gurus did me any practical good is open to debate, but I found the management and leadership seminars stimulating enough to feel that I hadn't wasted my time. Jim indulged himself in the luxury of a boat, a 30-foot cabin cruiser called Player's Retreat, which we moored at the bottom of the garden. Just a toy, he would say casually, though his eyes lit up like a schoolboy's whenever we cast off for a spin in her. As for me, I had my own hobby, flying helicopters. I trained for it, and in 1989, after 42 flying hours, I proudly got my license. Meantime, our house became my personal palace, and I was proud to show it off to friends with dinner parties and social gatherings. Jim and I would go riding in Richmond Park, and on my 29th birthday, Jim produced his trump card and surprises. I woke to find him standing by the bed with a bottle of champagne, fresh orange juice, and 2 glasses. "I think it's time you had a business card," he said. "Take a look out of the window." I scrambled out of bed and went to the window, and could not restrain a yell of delight. There in the drive stood a Rolls-Royce, a gleaming black silver spur, with the final touch, a huge blue ribbon tied around it in a giant bow. "Yours," said Jim. "Happy birthday." "Oh, Jim," I began. My knees actually felt weak with shock. "You," I said, kissing him, "are a wicked man, and I love you so much." I did too, and he knew it. I have always been a loyal person, and throughout our marriage, I never looked at another man. I was proud of that, proud of the fact that if I committed myself to someone, I would give that relationship everything that was in me to give. I would always be dressed nicely for Jim when he came back from the studio at the end of the day, and would often have a little surprise present to give him over dinner. So where did it all go wrong? The small cracks were there from the beginning. If only I'd had eyes to see them. He was incredibly possessive, looking on me as his property, and was the first to admit it. I belonged to him, and only to him. Sometimes, when I stayed at home, he would phone me as often as 10 times during the day to make sure I was there. I know I bring out the protective instinct in men. Or so I've been told, but this was getting beyond a joke. Oh, please. I'm trying to be compassionate, but sometimes these lines, I bring out the protective instinct in men. Oh. Jim looked at me as his little doll. I could have lived with that, even if it did become stifling towards the end. But slowly, as the success of our business increased, so did the pressure. We both started to work longer and longer hours. We both put on weight, a stone in my case, mainly around the hips, but also under my chin, the usual places. I was therefore able to commiserate with the Duchess of York when she later confided how desperately worried she had been about her own weight problems, and her fury at being dubbed the Duchess of Pork. My husband put on 2 stone. We both began to drink. I realized that I was in a catch-22 situation. Stress causes many people to put on weight. You don't feel sexy anymore, and you take refuge in more food or drink to compensate. Sex goes out the window, and that creates more stress in the marriage on this doleful, unending roundabout. Oh, I don't know. Just because you gain weight doesn't mean that you stop wanting sex from your partner. I don't know. Whatever. I also wanted children, very badly. We tried for the first 5 years, but without success. I always wanted 4, ideally 2 sets of twins. Okay. A twin set, I would joke, and Jim would respond with an exaggerated shudder. But he would have loved that too. You can't choose to have twins. Unless, I don't know. Okay. We even chose names for them. Price and Blake if they were boys. River and Storm. Storm with an E at the end. River and Storm for the girls. Oh, Lord, have mercy. It was actually predicted by 3 different clairvoyants over the space of 12 years that I would have 2 sets of twins, and the first would be boys. But I'm still waiting and praying. Hi, Tim. Almost without realizing it, we became more distant toward one another, as if suffering from a creeping emotional cancer. Days would go by, and we hardly spoke. Then came the sleeping tablets. Sleep is a great way to avoid the truth of what is going on in your life. Jim started staying nights at his studio, leaving me alone in my elegant, empty 5-bedroom ivory tower. One terrible night, the fragile shell finally cracked. My mother had come to stay for the weekend, and the 3 of us went to a local Japanese restaurant in Richmond for dinner. Jim and I drank too much sake. It's the kind of drink that slides up on you when you're not looking, and shortly after we got home, we became involved in the most ferocious argument in the hall. I had been getting ready for bed, and I was upstairs in my dressing room. Thankfully, Mummy had gone upstairs to her own bedroom. What that particular row was about, I will never remember, but suddenly Jim was ripping the slim silver chain from my neck and hurling it to the floor, and I was doing the same to him. Our lockets were strewn in pathetic bundles under our feet. Before I turned and stumbled for the kitchen, grabbed a sharp steak knife from the... What? Before I turned and stumbled for the kitchen, grabbed a sharp steak knife from the dresser and ran out into the night. Jim had disappeared into the living room. The first he knew of the drama was the sound of my Jeep roaring down the drive and out through the gates. I was at the wheel, tears streaming down my face, heading blindly for the city. As I drove, I started sawing away at my wrist with the knife. No, come on. Really? Really? Okay, guys, I'm sorry. I would have told you. Okay, but prepare. It's about to get worse, so you might need to skip. I felt the slashed hair and warm blood flow over my hands, but I drove on. Sometimes the blood stopped, and I would pull up and press the blade until the veins were open again. I found myself outside the Barbican, where my brother Neil was living, in the penthouse flat that had belonged to Jim before he moved. Upstairs, I rang his bell, hammered on the door, but there was no reply. I was dimly aware of a pool of blood spreading around my feet before I staggered back into the lift and into the street. It was a strange night, and getting stranger. Automatically, I drove to St. Thomas's Hospital, parked outside the familiar casualty entrance of the building I had known so well 8 years earlier, and switched off the ignition. I sat numbly behind the wheel as Big Ben chimed the single stroke of 1 a.m., the sound carrying clearly across the river. My dressing gown was soaked in dark blood. My hands were sticky. My feet felt slippery by the pedals. It was then that I heard the voice. It came from both outside and within me, deep and gentle, with a calm, almost hypnotic quality that transfixed me in my seat. Quite clearly, the voice said, "You don't want to do this. I have a lot of things for you to do. We are not ready to have you. You're not ready to go yet. Calm down, turn the engine back on, and I'm going to get you home." Well, shouldn't she have gone into the hospital? I listened and I obeyed. I drove from Westminster to Richmond, more than 5 miles, and all the way back home someone was sitting beside me, talking me home through the night. I mean, that doesn't surprise me because I do believe that in times, there's just too many stories of people, like in times of really trauma, that suddenly there's someone with them who guides them. So that doesn't surprise me. We passed a number of police cars, but no one tried to stop the blood-stained woman behind the windscreen. To this day, I don't think it was me driving that Jeep. I was at the wheel, but someone else was in charge. I know I'm in danger of being ridiculed, but that was the way it was. When I told Sarah Ferguson about it months later, she listened open-mouthed because she believes in these things too. I really believe I was touched by God that night, I told her. I think so too, she responded. And when I finally walked through my front door, I knew with an overwhelming certainty that this night marked the end of my marriage. It would take me another year to walk out, but this was the moment it happened. Jim was waiting for me in the hall, his face registering shock at the apparition stumbling in through the porch. All I wanted for him to gather me into his arms and say, "It'll be all right." Instead, he uttered just 3 words, "Oh my God." And he walked out into the night and got into his own car and drove away from me. It was my mother who ran downstairs to help me. She grabbed hold of me to stop my fainting, took me into the kitchen, put my dressing gown into the washing machine, mopped the blood off the floor of the Jeep, and managed to contact my brother to tell him to clean up the mess outside his front door before anyone saw it and started asking questions. After that, things went from bad to worse. In a kind of eerie parallel, our business sank relentlessly with our marriage. As our personal troubles deepened, so did our debts. The cash flow seized up, our credit cards were close to the limit, and our huge mortgage still had to be paid every month. Jim sold our boat, then his car. My Rolls Royce was my own, and I put it up for sale. But values had dropped so drastically that I took it off the market. In October 1989, the company went into liquidation, and the final humiliation came a year later when our lovely gable cot was ordered to be repossessed. In short, we lost everything. I was a young woman with a Rolls Royce to my name and precious little else, though at least I had a roof over my head while I tried to stem the downward roller coaster of my life. My mother was brilliant. To end that dreadful year, she took me to Scotland for Hogmanay, I don't know, to try to put the bad times behind me and to drink in the new year of hope. Unfortunately, I was so low that drink is just what I did. I locked myself in my room at our Ballater country hotel with 2 bottles of red wine for company and refused to come out. Next morning, with my head throbbing with a deserved hangover, Mummy sat me down and gave me a good old-fashioned talking to. "You've got debts of over £42,000, right?" I nodded. "Well, the only way you're going to get out of it is to pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and start all over again." She gave me the brightest smile she could muster. "What I'm trying to tell you is that you've got to open up the agency again." Something in me came to life. It was as if I had been in a maudlin stupor of self-pity for too long, and the words struck a forgotten chord. I was galvanized into action. Back in London, I started phoning people, the Corporation of London, the Department of Employment, HM Customs and Excise. Inside a week, I had my old office premises back, and had been granted a license, and had the printer's quotes for stationery, and had obtained the PAYE and VAT numbers I needed. The message I constantly drummed into myself every morning in the mirror was, "I'm going for it." In the next 5 weeks it took to set up the new company, I was furniture remover, interviewer, secretary, director, and tea maker. Very important that. I was a one-woman operation, and I started up a whole new employment agency on my own, strictly temps only. Anybody who wanted a more permanent job, I would pass on to Jim. He was doing his best to start up his own agency, too. Despite the trauma of our split, we remained good friends. In that frenetic period, as winter gave way to spring, I learned the meaning of the word workaholic. I didn't go out. I didn't date anybody. I had no social life. I just worked. I grew to hate weekends because the office was closed. I was up at 6 a.m. every day and in the office by 7:30. Oh, that's a good idea. I think I'm going to go into the office tomorrow for 7, and then I can work for... Oh, no, because I have to pick up my granddad at 7. Never mind. Every night I would come home, make a sandwich, eat it in front of the TV with my 2 cats beside me on the sofa, then fall into an exhausted sleep. Sounds delightful. Honestly, I love working. Well, not just any job, but now my new job, I'm in the food industry, and I love the food industry. I can't even tell you. Some people are just made for the food industry, and I am made for it because you're just always running around. You're always yapping. You're always trying to solve problems. I love it. And when I'm working in the food industry, I'm in there, even on my days off. I'm like, "What's going on? Need some help?" After 3 months, I made my first tiny profit. When I saw the figures, I whooped out loud. It was modest, but now at least I could start paying off my debts and pick up the threads of my life again. It was that May that I saw the television program that was to change everything. I was idly running through the channels during yet another evening alone at home when I saw some ponies galloping around a field, their helmeted riders flailing away with mallets at an elusive white ball, and a lot of noisy whooping and hollering going on, mainly from those in the saddle. Polo. I thought to myself, this looks interesting. I like horses. I need to come out of my self-imposed purdah and socialize once again. On the spur of the moment, I picked up the phone and found the number of the Epsom Polo Club. I'd like to learn to play polo, I said. Is there someone there who can teach me? And that is the end of that chapter. Okay, this is a short video, but I've got a ton of stuff to do for Christmas. I got to go outside and haul in that spindly little Christmas tree from the car. Okay, thank you so much for being with me. I will be with you very soon, and that is all. Okay, I'll see you in the comments. Talk to you soon. Bye.